Brigham Buhler. Welcome to the show. What's going on?
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
We met recently for the first time at our Senate hearing. You're the first person to have come on the show, actually, in the wake of that incredible Senate hearing, which I think made a huge impact. And that was our first time meeting. So I'm excited to... It's funny because we met, but we didn't actually get to know each other at the hearing, even though we partook in this incredible experience together. Peak life moment for me. I'm sure it was for you as well.
It was a roller coaster ride.
It was a roller coaster, yeah. So I'd just love to hear about your background. I know you've done some work straddling the line between healthcare and pharma and medical devices.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just start there. Yeah, share your background for us.
Yeah, I started out right out of college, bright-eyed, bushy-tail as a drug rep, thinking I was going to change the world, and found out real quickly that that's not what that space is for. And within a few years, I worked to get out of that, and I jumped into med device, and I thought it was going to be different. And I got a firsthand experience working with some of the best and brightest surgeons in the country in the Texas Medical Center of Houston, Texas, which is the largest medical center in the world, where a lot of cancer research and innovation occurs. Had the opportunity to work with amazing clinicians throughout the state of Texas for almost a decade. And from there, I left and started labs and pharmacies trying to provide preventative care analytics and data within the insurance framework. And that was where I first got the experience and the knowledge of behind the curtain on how broken our system really is. As soon as I got to being an entrepreneur in that space and trying to deal with the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers and all of these players that are a part of our healthcare system.
Similar to Callie, right? Callie means
Yeah.
he was in the belly of the beast for many years, and it's only in hindsight, coming out of that system, that he can really call a spade in terms of like the corruption that he's seen.
Yeah, and when I was a drug rep, I had a little bit biased of an experience because when I started, I launched Cialis. So sometimes people go, well, dude, you were in it 3 years. It couldn't have been that bad. Well, when you're selling Cialis and it was like a fun, revolutionary 36-hour Viagra, it's a lifestyle drug. There's no real side effect profile.
It's actually good for you.
Yeah, there's a vasodilator, which is beneficial to some heart benefits and some other protein delivery, protein synthesis, all of these things. And so it was a fun drug. But about a year and a half in, I got pivoted and promoted, and they put me in mental health drugs. And that was when I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like just learning, less than 2% of side effects are reported. Being in the field, I would come out as a drug rep and go to type in the computer. And when I started, I could type notes and say, the doctor told me that this side effect occurred with this patient. And within the year and a half that I was there, they got rid of all of that. It became drop-down boxes where I couldn't say what we talked about. I had to choose an option that most closely resembled the conversation. And there wasn't usually side effects listed in that, right?
Wow.
Because as soon as enough side effects are reported and they're officially in the system, now you got to go through this rigorous process of reporting an adverse event. And that's why a lot of people don't report those adverse events. It's a logistical nightmare.
Is it like through VAERS? Is that what the system is called?
So the originally, when you file a complaint with the company, then the company's compliance department will call you, then they'll call your doctor, then they'll try and get a hold of the patient, and now you're caught up in this candidly shitstorm of drama. And the company, even though they don't say it, they're frustrated with you because you've now created a bunch of work and potential liability for the company itself. And then reps, there's hundreds of reps throughout the nation whose paychecks are contingent on this drug staying in the market. So then they're frustrated with you. And people are like, oh, some idiot in Houston, Texas reported an adverse event. Now we all got to deal with it. So it's a slippery slope. The incentive systems are wrong. They're flawed. And then I left that to go into med device. And just over years, what I saw of med device and the main gist of it is people assume because something's FDA approved that it's good as gold and you're safe, and in reality, 30% of the drugs that the FDA approves either get a recall or a label change. That's with 2% of the adverse events getting reported. And then you move from the drug market to the med device market, and it's the wild west.
Wow.
I am telling you, literally 90% of the products in the operating room have never had a human safety study. And people go, what? That makes no sense.
What was that documentary a couple of years ago about medical devices?
Oh, I know what you're talking about,
was,
and I can't remember the name of it.
Blinding light? Or,
Blind spot? Was it blind spot? Or, it's spot on though. What it breaks down is there's a process in the FDA called the 510K approval process, which allows you to come in through a loophole and bring your product into human surgeries if you can show there's a like product already in the marketplace or historically had been. And so what I explain to people is, imagine taking your rotary phone in the 80s and putting that, and now you daisy chain all the way to the new iPhone with AI. That's what's happened in our operating rooms. And so the technology's leapfrogged forward so much, but they haven't gone back and reevaluated the safety, the efficacy, any of it. And oftentimes there's products put into the operating room that they've never evaluated how to take the product out of the body. They only evaluated how to put it in. So like a lot of the women's health products that I saw, there were multiple recalls where they couldn't take these products back out of the woman's body because they had merged into the uterus. Like huge recalls. Hips that start squeaking after 6 months, where when a person walks, their hip is literally metal on metal hips, where the metal shards are breaking off and causing metal poisoning, which manifests in the form of like almost psychosis, like you are suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia. All of these are real world recalls that have been documented and exposed. And anything I talk about too, because of the Rogan podcast, I've done references on the Waste to Well website. So any of the stories that I share, I have documented records for any of your listeners if they're interested. Because I know sometimes people want to.
I'm sure they are. Yeah. Especially my listeners are for sure. Yeah, it's super interesting. So basically, like what happens is if a product is similar enough to a product that's already on the market and has been greenlit by the FDA, then it doesn't have to go through the same kind of scrutiny and testing. Correct. It's just similar enough where it just gets like an automatic green light.
Correct. And then that sometimes happens in the pharmaceutical market. That was something that I've tried to break down. When they say, how did the OxyContin crisis happen? It happened because the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, their patent was running out on their hydrocodone pain med. And so they were scrambling, trying to figure out, how do we take our cotton delivery system and plug in a new molecule that'll allow us to repatent it and make billions for another decade? And the answer was Oxy. But the problem was Oxy's 8 to 10 times more addictive than hydrocodone, 8 to 10 times more habit forming. And then you go, well, hold on, well, that's what the FDA does. They regulate it, right? No, they met with the FDA in private. They put the head of the FDA up at a hotel room for 3 nights, where they not only got an indication, but they also got a label that says less addictive, less abuse potential, even though it was 10 times potentially more addictive.
Wow.
And then that head of the FDA, 36 months later, went to go work for Purdue Pharma, the company that launched the opioid crisis. But then if you take a step back...
the revolving door.
Yeah, and if you go a step back further, the Sackler family created the Valium crisis of the 70s. The same family created this addiction to Valium in major cities like New York City and Chicago. They were putting out ads in newspapers, you name it. Stressed, take a Valium. Wife is a little moody, give her a Valium.
Wow.
Like, it's... And we're one of the only countries that allows direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription drugs, which is crazy.
Right, the drug ads on TV.
Yeah.
Like during the primetime slots. Yeah, man, it's scary. There was recently, I don't know if you saw, there was data that came out recently. There was a paper published basically looking at the rates of death among users of the 2 latest FDA-approved drugs to treat Alzheimer's disease, aducanumab and lecanemab. And I don't know how all this stuff works. I'm sure you know way better than I do. But essentially what they did was they used post-marketing data to estimate, they used a range to estimate how many people were actually on these drugs, because that data doesn't exist. So they use a range. They go from like the super conservative end all the way to the very liberal end. And based on the deaths that are reported in the FDA's own system, they then use that to estimate whether there is an increased risk of death or a decrease in risk of death. And what they saw was that the users of these Alzheimer's drugs actually saw based on that range of estimates of how many people were actually using it, because they don't know, they don't have that data, between a 2- and 4-fold increased risk of death from the use of these Alzheimer's drugs that were approved from jump, like from the start, based on incredibly shoddy data. There was like an FDA panel of 12 experts. I believe it was something like 8 of them said that the drug shouldn't be approved. They didn't approve the drug's accelerated like approval pathway. And some even said that I think it was like overwhelmingly the committee was overwhelmingly anti the approval process. And now we have this drug that is allegedly, according to this data, which is preliminary, but increasing risk of death. How does that kind of thing happen?
I remember when I was a drug rep asking, wait a second, when I'm looking at the placebo versus the drug itself, like Prozac at the time was a big SSRI and it was a blockbuster drug for Lilly. Prozac, I want to say, had like a 50-something% efficacy rate and placebo had like a 39. But the risk profile of Prozac for suicide and suicidal ideation in the first 6 to 8 weeks was through the roof. And then they were trying to get it indicated in younger and younger patient populations because once you've maxed out a market, you've got to grow your market share. And the only way to do that is to add new patients. And how do you add new patients? You add new indications or you add the breadth of who you're catering these prescriptions to.
Now, when you were selling these drugs, were you aware of the data? Because I know that these drugs, I mean, they definitely work for a subset of patients, but they're overprescribed today. I mean, the last data that I saw was that they tend to work best in people with, moderate to severe depression. But for mild depression, maybe even moderate depression, they tend not to work better than exercise or placebo.
Well, that was when I was like, I can't do this job. When I had Cialis, it was fun. It was lighthearted. It was a cool job. I was also young. I was right out of college. When I got moved to the mental health drugs and, we're promoting Zyprexa, which is a, antipsychotic and, or Cymbalta, Symbyax, and Zyprexa were the products I carried. And they were trying to grow the market of these antipsychotics. And essentially, a talk track would be something to the nature of sometimes these patients manifest in ways that you may not notice and that you got to be a little more nuanced about, like the mother who couldn't sleep at night and was busy reorganizing the house because she's so riddled with anxiety and stress. That's a form of manic behavior. And so dig a little deeper. And I just couldn't do it. I'm like, this is not. And so I would get in trouble for not selling. You have to sell the bag. And I would get in trouble for only selling the products I believed in. And I had that same problem in med device. That's what I was talking to Rogan about. He's like, well, what about med device? I would literally tell a doctor, do not use the pump. And he's like, you work for this company. I'm like, this pump is a piece of shit and it is dangerous for your patients. I would not use this pump. And I wouldn't even show it. But I had 5,000 products, right? So I could say, here are the 200 products that are phenomenal. Here's what I would not use. And I could position myself as like an advocate and an ally to their practice. And that's how I sold. But even then, the pressure, the incentive systems, hitting quarterly numbers, it just becomes dang near impossible. And, after I lost my brother to the opioid crisis, kind of a lot like Callie, losing his mother, that was when I transitioned into the entrepreneurship side and I owned labs and pharmacies and things within the ecosystem that were attempting to give clinicians diagnostic tools to provide optimal care. And I saw the dark side of that. Because once you start billing insurance, you realize, oh my God, these insurance companies are telling the doctors what to do. Like, your primary care is castrated. They are not able to make decisions autonomously or side by side with a patient for the benefit of the patient. Everything is required to go through insurance in the insurance model, and the insurance company is an obstructionist model. They put a hurdle upon a hurdle upon a hurdle to any sort of accessibility to preventative or diagnostic care. And that's why I said in front of the Senate when we testified was, we can't treat what we refuse to diagnose, and we can't diagnose what we don't test. And so in order to cure a disease or prevent a chronic disease, we have to first understand the root cause. And the root cause in medicine is being obstructed by the insurance companies. And as you begin to learn more and more about what's going on, like what you've seen with big food and promoted and exposed about big food, the same thing is happening on the healthcare side where they're monetizing chronic disease. What Callie and Casey are exposing, and RFK and all of our friends, this is a space that has been corrupted and captured And there's a lot of money in sickness and a lot less money in curing it.
Yeah, that is for sure. Well, how is one then to best advocate for themselves within the healthcare system? Because you come from pharma and the medical device world. I'll just use my dad as an example. My dad recently had a total shoulder replacement. He had a total knee replacement, and he's doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. He needed those surgeries, but obviously there are other devices on the market. There's a range of devices for a given indication. How is a patient then best to kind of see through all of these conflicts of interest, and best advocate for themselves?
I think you and I are doing it. Like, part of it is giving people knowledge and letting them understand that, historically a clinician was a position of power that you don't question. Historically, the federal government, a position of power you don't question. Historically, right. The FDA, the CDC, the NIH, authoritarian regimes that we blindly believe in and follow. And I understand that because we want to believe in the betterment of mankind. And I think of George Carlin, like, I like people. It's people in large masses that I begin to question. And like, if we allow these people to operate in a vacuum and make decisions without any checks or balances, which is what has occurred, then we will begin to see, like I said again at the Senate testimony, Eisenhower's speech, the second half of the speech, that everyone talks about the military industrial complex. He warns about the scientific industrial complex. And if we allow corporate interest to capture that, and that's what we've seen. There's so much monetization of chronic disease, including, unfortunately, surgeries. I watched a lot of surgeries happen that should not have happened. From spine surgery, I bet conservatively, easily, 30% of spine surgeries should never happen. Easily. Same thing with knees, shoulders, all of it. To a hammer, everything's a nail. And to a clinician who's incentivized by the hospital and held to volume metrics, it's a pay-to-play program. And you eat what you kill. And the goal is to kill and eat as much as possible, because then you are the next guy to be the chief of surgery at that hospital system. It's who's generating the most revenue and the most profits. And so they are incentivized throughout that system to look for people to cut on, rather than look for alternatives, right? And so I'm going to be somewhat biased towards anything that takes away from my surgical volumes. But something that's staggering is they love spine surgeries at hospital systems, because there is a 60% chance within 3 years you're back under the knife again. Like, the majority of spine surgeries end up having a secondary surgery. And that is a huge revenue generator for hospital systems. And so there is incentives to cut. And how patients can advocate for themselves is what they're doing. I think you educate yourself, you question everything, do the research, try to understand. And the biggest is get proactive, get preventative, and get away from waiting to get sick to get well. Like, through diet, lifestyle, and nutrition, all the things you talk about, all the things Casey's talking about. This is the future of medicine, and it's been with us all along. We don't need to find it in a bottle. Yes, there's a time for prescription intervention, but the heart attack you have in your 50s started in your 30s. The stroke you had in your 60s started in your 40s. The diabetes you have in your 30s started in your 20s. The system is failing people, whether it's our food, our diet, our guidance from our clinicians. Across the board, it's failing people. And that's why I started Ways to Well. Our goal is to get proactive, predictive, and personalized. If we get proactive and we quantify for people where they're headed, I can project out if you're going to have a heart attack, a stroke, one of the 5 chronic diseases that are killing so many Americans, metabolic disease. We can prevent all of it.
Well, there's an important distinction to be made between, the kinds of chronic diseases that we're all trying to fight against, that we assembled for that Senate hearing to address the larger public health issues in society, the commingling of the food industry, the ultra processed food industry with the USDA and the FDA. But certainly there, as you mentioned, there is a time and place for medicine, right? Like in the setting of acute care, emergent care. If you injure yourself,
at this point, I almost believe what Dana White said. I don't know if you heard him say.
No, what he said.
He said he would never go to a primary care again.
Interesting.
That he will only go to a doctor if he blows out a knee, blows out his back, injures his neck, something catastrophic. And I do say that to people when they say, well, what's insurance for? I explain, you have to begin to paradigm shift. These guys are not your friends. They are not looking out for you and your family. They are monetizing chronic disease, and they make more money by you being sick than by you being well. And it's like car insurance. It is there if you total the fucking car. It's there if you wreck the car. It's not there to rotate the tires. It's not there to change the oil. It's not there to wax the car and maintain it and make the car look beautiful. That is not what insurance is there for. It is there for something catastrophic. And in fact, they don't even call it insurance anymore. It's called managed care because they're managing chronic disease. And their focus as a platform and as a entity is to manage your chronic disease. And like any capitalistic corporation, you know, their goal is to make great quarterly earnings and profits. And so now there's a dozen levers they can pull to monetize your illness and sickness.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, from the standpoint of chronic disease, I mean, that's the onus really, I think, is on you, the individual, to do what you can to batten down the hatches and stack the odds in your favor. You can't show up to your primary care office expecting them to instill wellness unto you. I mean, that's something that, wellness is something that when you're negotiating with yourself to get up off the couch and get to the gym, or when you're pushing your shopping cart around the perimeter of the supermarket and those aisles are tempting, those aisles with all those ultra processed yummy foods are tempting, but that's, I think, where true wellness happens. And so I think people like you and the work that we're trying to do with the Genius Life, it's so important with this from the standpoint of chronic disease prevention. But then when it comes to acute care, emergent care, I mean, are there ways of sussing out how is one to find the best care? To
me, it's wild how oftentimes little effort people put into their health. Like, I've got friends that will spend months interviewing people to do a construction job on their house or take their car to 4 different mechanics to get the best price, but then blindly follow the first charismatic doctor that they meet. And I'm like, well, hold on. Like anything, get a second opinion and a third opinion and a fourth opinion, because you're going to find the truth is usually in the middle. And let's blend these thought processes and let people play antagonists to each other, devil's advocate. And that's the best way to get a comprehensive approach. I mean, obviously, if you got a gunshot wound, you got to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But even with joints, total joints, shoulders, knees, elbows, like what you talked your dad's going through. I mean, I can tell you after 12 years of being in that space, there's a lot of guys that everybody that walks in that door is getting a total joint. I mean, that's just how it is. And then there's a lot of ethical clinicians too. I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush. There's a lot of pressure put on those doctors to hit volumes and to hit metrics and to get their big salary. And if they want their big salary, they've got to bring the heat to the hospital system, or else, and then even from there, primary cares have been corporately captured by the hospital systems. There's very few independent primary cares in America anymore. People don't understand that either. The primary cares are now essentially referral networks to the neurologists, to the the spine surgeons, the orthopedic surgeons, all of that. And so they control the referral network. So if I'm a hospital and I know that the insurance company is going to require a referral and a primary in order for me to do the surgery and get the workup, then I go out and I acquire the primary care practices, and they know as soon as you see somebody with a bum knee, just go ahead and send them to us. We'll run an MRI and we'll make the decision from there. And so they've siloed and compartmentalized off. Not to say your primary care has bad intentions. They're doing what they're taught to do. I'm in this system, hurting knee. I'm not a knee guy. I do cough, cold, sneezes, and write pills. I'm going to refer this to a specialist. I'm going to let that specialist evaluate an MRI. Now, the next guy, MRI guy. And he's like, okay, well, I get paid by the hospital. My goal is to help drive surgeries. This is on the cusp. I'll let the clinician decide. Clinician gets it and goes, well, it looks like we probably should do surgery, right? And that's the system people are caught in, and everyone almost has a form of plausible deniability. And they're all rowing towards the same cause in a way, which is to monetize that patient, because that's what the system's built to do.
To bilk the patient, yeah. Well, you've interfaced with so many doctors. What would you say are the top red flags to look out for when assessing a doctor and, you know, and trying to ensure that the physician that you're interfacing with is, you know, is being as authentic and high integrity as possible, not just pushing a procedure onto you?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but the stereotype of a super flashy doctor is real. And those super flashy guys, to me, historically, a lot of them are living a lifestyle beyond their means. Like, you got to understand, like, even some of my friends as orthopedic surgeons, as an average American, you think, oh, wow, man, that guy's an orthopedic surgeon. He's rich. A lot of those guys never made a check until they're 35, 36 years old. I started making money at 22. I had a 401k, investments, everything. You come out of med school, residency, fellowship, 35 years old, $2 million in debt. You think you're going to get a huge payday. You're now an employee of a hospital. They're paying you literally $250,000 a year starting out, which sounds like crazy money, but not when you have $2 million in debt and you didn't start making money till you were 35 years old. And then most of those guys within 2 to 3 years go out and buy the biggest mansion they can. And now they've got a big mortgage and they got a wife and kids and they're in the system. And they came out with the best of intentions. They really did. They wanted to help people. They were idealistic, and the system chews them up and spits them out. And over and over and over again, I watched clinicians fall into that trap, like over and over again. And so I would say find the clinician that isn't trying to push the surgery, you know, like that's willing to sit down and talk to you. And these are hard things to find because most orthopedic surgeons, they send their PA or their fellow in to do all the pre-workup. And unless you're somebody they're going to cut on, they don't really waste their time. So they screen you out before you ever get there. And the only ones getting screened out are the ones that are really, really definitely not surgical, right? And then as you get closer and closer to that, maybe surgical, maybe not, just be aware. If somebody's really trying to push a surgery, they may not have your best interest at heart. And it could be that you need the surgery, but go get 2 or 3 opinions.
Yeah. And even if you like the surgeon, would you say it's always a good idea to get a second or
always.
third or fourth opinion?
Every time. Because I became friends with a lot of really charismatic surgeons. I wouldn't let them operate on my dog. Like, that's the other thing that's scary. You should get multiple opinions because the number 3 cause of death in America right now is
iatrogenesis, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
It's like medical errors, essentially. Medical errors.
Yeah, it's medical errors, and I literally, I'm not kidding. I saw a spine surgery where we operated on the wrong spinal column, wrong lumbar. I saw a surgery where they kept a tourniquet up too long and had to amputate a leg. I saw, you name it, mishap after mishap. Everything is risk reward. Any prescription drug, risk reward. That's why with me, with the vaccine, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But I'm a free thinker. And I look at that and I go, well, the incentive systems are skewed. I'm not in a patient population that's at high risk. There's not a whole lot of research of long-term data on the safety profile of these compounds. You've now taken all my recourse and the liability off the plate of these big pharmaceutical conglomerates. I'm not putting this shit in my body. Like, no way.
They also weren't being all that forthcoming about the risks early on. The risk, there was a very early signal of increased risk of cardiomyopathy in boys. And I mean, that took a long time for them to acknowledge. I think only recently has that been.
Now all of it's coming out.
Yeah,
it's scary. It's scary. And I had a friend who worked at a hospital and she was forced to get vaccinated. And I think it was the 3rd stick. She ended up having profuse bleeding and had to have an emergency hysterectomy. And literally the doctors, when they were talking about it, nobody wanted to say what it probably was. And they refused to say because it's just this thing like this. You just don't want to admit it. But it's like anything's risk reward. That's all I'm getting at. Not to say do or don't do anything. Take your health seriously and fight for yourself because nobody else will, even your clinician. There's some out there that are really good, but there's just as many that aren't as good. Yeah. And so if you don't take sovereignty and autonomy over your health through diet, lifestyle, nutrition, and educating yourself, you're doing you and your family a disservice.
Well, what would you say are the low-hanging fruit for most people with regards to diet and lifestyle?
The biggest thing I think is measurability. And that's one of the things I've talked about. Like, the problem with the existing establishment is, let me compare and contrast a cash pay clinic like Ways to Well to the primary care of the insurance company. If you were to come into Ways to Well and you were to say, I want a full workup, what would that entail? In a dream world, I would love to do a DEXA. Okay, now that I've done a DEXA scan, I know your lean muscle mass, your visceral fat, your subcutaneous fat, where you're storing muscle, how your right quad versus your left quad, all of these metrics. A VO2 max. Now I know your lung capacity, your lung health, your cardiovascular conditioning, and your risk factors on all of these various cardiovascular issues. And then obviously comprehensive blood work. If you gave me just those three and we loaded into the AI algorithm, we with stunning accuracy can begin to project out an overall health score and where you're trending. Now we're getting personalized, we're getting proactive, and we're getting predictive. You cannot do any of those things in the traditional model other than the blood work. Insurance is not going to cover a DEXA. They're not going to cover a VO2 max, and they're not even going to cover blood work. They will typically push back and say, no, run a basic lipid panel. Well, a clinician really can't do anything with a lipid panel. That's so minimal. Like, we run over 70 biomarkers, and it's not unique to Ways to Well. This is the stuff that Peter Attia is talking about. All these longevity clinicians are focused on these things. And if you really want to drive your lifespan, the only way quantifiably that has been proven is to drive your health span. And if we can drive health span indirectly, we hope to drive lifespan. If you look at the difference between a centenarian and somebody who dies at the average human life expectancy in America, it's the onset of chronic disease. So let's get proactive and predictive. Let's begin to build out the algorithms. Let's know where you're headed. And then that's not even tying into the future of medicine with wearables and large language models and monitoring patients 24/7, your heart rate variability, your REM sleep, your deep sleep. The more data sets we feed into the AI, the better we can do. And then for patients with anxiety, depression, a clinician in the primary care market, you come in and again, they just had the drug rep in there telling them to write you an SSRI or an anti-anxiety and a sleep aid. And you're out the door with 3 drugs and we'll see you again next year. In a cash pay model, we're going to take the time, look at your blood work. Is there a hormonal imbalance? No. Okay. Now let's look at your brain health. Have you ever had any sort of brain scan or brain workup? Have you ever had any of that? And the answer for most people is no. So I would immediately want to do an EEG and assess where the brain is firing and misfiring. Where are these neurons going? A large percentage of people have had concussions or brain traumas that they don't even know about. And these are all things that can be fixed at stunning effectiveness. Way more like MERT, magnetic electroresonance therapy, has a 80-something% success rate in curing depression and anxiety. And it's literally a tool that we use for 30 days. You never go on a prescription drug and you're done.
What is this technology?
It's called MERT, magnetic electroresonance therapy. It's been on the market like 20 years. But now we use AI-guided MERT to adjust it unique to your brain frequency. And it's a company called Wave Neuroscience that we work with, with unbelievable success rates. So why would we reach to a antidepressant, or an SSRI when there's these other tools in the tool belt? The reason is a primary care in that system can only work with what the insurance gives them. And the insurance says, no, we're not covering MERT. The patient needs to fail 2 or more SSRIs before we'll allow you to even consider MERT. So they push them back to the SSRIs. That's where we come full circle to the monetization of the disease state. Like I was saying earlier, people don't understand, wait a second, why would my insurance want me on drugs that cost them money? No, it doesn't. It does not. United Healthcare, Cigna, Aetna, the big 5 insurance companies own the middlemen called the pharmacy benefit managers. Every single prescription drug you take, they get a kickback to their PBM held at a different holding company, a shell company. Now, so here's how this works, just so your listeners can understand. Let's use the big one right now is the GLP-1s. $1,500 a month, $1,200 to $1,500 a month is what the insurance carrier is claiming it pays. What they're not telling you is they're getting anywhere from a $400 to $600 rebate to the PBM per month, per patient, per drug. Okay.
Wait, what's the PBM?
Pharmacy benefit manager.
Okay.
So a lot of people, 100% of prescription coverage in the United States goes through a pharmacy benefit manager. Pharmacy benefit managers were established in the 70s to drive down the cost of prescription care drugs as an ally and an advocate for the people. They were going to negotiate with Big Pharma, fight on our behalf, drive down the cost of these drugs. Within a decade, the insurance company said, wait a second, we can buy these guys and we can argue the price of the drug. And as soon as they went out and captured them, so 90-something% of the prescription drug coverage in America is written through 3 pharmacy benefit managers. All 3 of those pharmacy benefit managers are owned by the big insurance companies.
Wow.
And so now they pivot and they start negotiating up the price of a drug and say, give us a rebate to this holding company. So now $1,000 drug, they get a $500 rebate. They never paid $1,000. At the end of the year, they go to guys like me who employ 350 people and they say, Brigham, Max cost us $1,000 a month times 12 months. That's $12,000. We have to raise your copay, your deductible, your out-of-pocket expenses, and we've got to be able to make a living here. But they never paid the $12,000. They paid $6,000, right? And that's just the drugs that are big blockbuster drugs. Now you go to the drugs that are generics like metformin. If you come into, when I owned a retail pharmacy, you come in and you want to fill a metformin prescription, it cost me $2, I'd charge you $4. These are real examples. I swipe your card, your United Healthcare, boom, pops up in the computer. You have to charge Max $10. That's your copay on that drug. I can't tell you legally, I have a gag clause. I'm not allowed to tell you that I would sell it to you for $4. I charge you the $10. Instantly, the $6 gets pulled out of the computer and goes off to the pharmacy benefit manager where they hold the profits. Not at United, not at Cigna, not at Aetna, at another holding company, a shell company. And so every drug, when you begin to understand this, there's a lot of money in you being sick. And the pharmacy benefit managers are literally making billions of dollars in revenue. The insurance companies are making billions of dollars in revenue. And there's no incentive to get you off medicines,
right?
Because there's so much money in prescribing new medicines.
Yeah. Exchanging.
And so this is this loop feedback system that I was trying to explain to the Senate, because a lot of them don't know, and a lot of clinicians don't know. They just don't know how this all works. And the only reason I know is because I owned pharmacies, I owned labs, I tried to bill the insurance companies, and I saw behind the curtain. And so I tell everyone, the margins are made in the mystery. And people are like, why is healthcare so confusing? Why don't I just know what the cost is of something? Because the more confused you are, the easier it is for them to hide the magic trick.
Wow.
As crazy as that sounds, this is the real world we're living in.
It's wild. Have you seen the recent South Park episode on Ozempic?
Oh my God, yeah.
They
nail it.
Yeah, they nail it.
It's so
With
funny.
Carmen going back and forth between the doctor's office and his insurance company.
Yeah.
It's like having to convince the insurance company, and just how difficult and Byzantine and clandestine they make the whole process.
Yeah.
It's so maddening.
And so on anything they can't monetize, right, it's an obstructionist mindset. So there's like prescription drugs. It's really easy to get a drug typically because they're monetizing it. If it's a drug they won't cover, it's usually because they don't have a rebate affiliated with their PBM. So an example, opioid crisis. I had a non-addictive, non-abusive pain cream. It was a blockbuster drug throughout the United States that people were using as an alternative to addictive drugs. Insurance quit covering it within like 6 months and began to send letters to doctors, threatening them, telling them to write them an opioid, don't write them this ketamine cream, it cost us more money. Well, of course, because there's no rebate. They're not getting a rebate on my drug because it's a compounded drug. They're getting a rebate on the opioid. So every month that patient goes and fills an opioid, they're getting a kickback.
Wow.
And then you do that on weight loss drugs. Every month they go fill that weight loss drug, they're getting a kickback. And so why would you ever let a patient go from being pre-diabetic to diabetic if you're the one writing the checks? Because a pre-diabetic patient versus a diabetic is a 7-fold increase in the cost of care till the day that patient dies. But the insurance companies know by the time that patient is chronically ill and needs a surgery, like a heart surgery, they will be another insurer or the federal government's problem. Because on average, people switch jobs every 2 to 3 years, and most of their insurance coverage comes from their employer. And so they have lever after lever after lever, and they just are pulling levers and moving dollars and moving dollars and moving dollars. And it's sickening. When you really, really get to know it, it's nauseating. And so that's why I moved to all cash pay. That's what I was trying to explain. Like when you talk about a life raft, I tried to build a life raft. I tried to work within their system. I had a blood lab. I had a genetics lab. I had everything in the insurance model, and they would not cover any, for about a year, they cover it and then they get rid of all of it. And insurance goes, no, fuck that. We're not covering it. And so now the patient is left coming out of pocket. And so it's so insidious that we had to move to a cash pay. And that's the only way to really make autonomous decisions with a patient, hand in hand, take sovereignty over your health and being able to find out.
What was the downside of that? It's going to be a higher upfront cost to the patient, is it not?
Well, that's the misnomer. No, in reality, again, owning a pharmacy, the metformin example, I would have sold you the metformin for $4 because you told me you had insurance. I have a gag clause with the insurance company. It's against the law, and I can be sued for me to tell you that I can sell it to you cash cheaper because I'm subverting the insurance. I'm undercutting the insurance company. I'm not allowed to do that. Same thing with blood work. The blood panel we pull, if you were to walk into Quest and say, I want this blood panel, and I'm a United person, they're going to quote you $2,000+ on a blood test that we charge $400 something for with 45 minutes with a doctor, deep diving into over 70 biomarkers, walking through family history, answering any of those questions. And with the future of medicine, what I'm seeing with large language models like Alan, the chatbot we're rolling out, is for patients who need to do it on a budget, I'm going to offer them to talk to the AI bot instead of a human, because the most expensive part of this whole equation is the human asset. It costs a lot of money to pay doctors. But if I have a large language model and a chatbot that is better than the doctor, you, the patient, may say, I don't have the budget to talk to a doctor. I will choose the large language model. And then the AI will walk you through your blood work. And the AI will assess your blood work. And then at the very end, a clinician will get on for 5 minutes, review that blood work, answer any additional questions, check the AI's homework, and then you're off to the races.
AI is scary good.
It's terrifying.
These days. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's insane. There's no aspect of what I do that hasn't been enhanced in some way by AI. Yeah. It's just, it's incredible.
The only dark side I can see in the healthcare space, so we're using AI now, and it's going to assess all those data sets we talked about. We're going to have your genetics, your family history, where the AI remembers, even on the calls. Like my clinician has to go back, chart review, spend 15 minutes before they get on the call with you, look over all your blood work, look over the notes from the previous call, refresh their memory, try and remember details about your family history, all of this, get on the call, finish the call, annotate for another or dictate for another 15 minutes, put it all in the system so they can remember it all for the next time. AI does all that instantly. It remembers what color shirt you're wearing. It remembers every detail about you. You get on a call with a chatbot, it knows every single detail. It reminds me of the movie Terminator 2.
It's crazy.
It never gets tired. It never gets hungry or irritable. It's there 24/7 as a resource in your pocket. And I think it's the future of medicine. And I think it's how we dig ourselves out of this hole. It's a component.
It's amazing. Have you tried having a conversation with AI?
Yeah.
Like the voice chat feature?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
We have a chat bot. I'll show you after this. It's an alien, Alan the alien, and he's literally a avatar, but you just talk to him. You can ask him any of your health questions, and it's like you're doing a Zoom call with a little alien cartoon, and he is unbelievable at how well he nails it. And we've given him humor, and he cracks jokes. I mean, I'm telling you, it's wild. And this is as bad as it'll ever get. It's going to get better every year. I can't imagine where we are in like 5 years.
And also for like diagnostics. I mean, your average physician has seen, a couple thousand patients over the span of their career, maybe. But an AI bot that's able to mine healthcare data, I mean, obviously this opens up a whole other can of worms in terms of how we protect that data. But I mean, imagine an AI model that is able to look at potentially millions of records.
You're reading my mind. That's where we're at. Like at Waste Well right now, we have 55,000 patients at our company. And all of that is getting loaded into the AI algorithms. And we're tracking what date men started testosterone, women started estrogen, peptides. What is BPC doing? What are the quantifiable differences in all these various metrics? And now imagine when patients tie that into their wearables and they give us access to their Whoop, and we know that we had 3,000 men on testosterone and we saw an increase in deep sleep of X and REM sleep of Y. The beauty of these AI large language models, whatever you want, they are masterful at capturing data, compiling it, and sorting through to find trends. That's the single greatest tool. That's the positive. The negative is, and this is what I said on Joe too, on Rogan, was it's a sword that cuts both ways, because the last person you want digging through your underwear drawer is the federal government or the insurance companies. And if these insurance companies begin to utilize these metrics and these tools to assess when you're going to have a heart attack or stroke, they're going to cut your coverage before you have the catastrophic event. And this is just me being real with people. This is why I think you should take preventative care, if possible, out of the hands of your clinician that is affiliated with the insurance company and into the autonomy and sovereignty of yourself. And you bankroll that. And you're talking literally, a few $100s a year. It's not, and I know everyone can't afford that, but the cost of being well is astronomically cheaper than the cost of chronic disease. It's the number one reason for bankruptcy in the country is healthcare. You've got to take yourself out of this sick care system because they're just waiting for you to get sick and to make money off of your illness.
And so what is Ways to Well? It's a network of clinics?
Ways to Well is the healthcare practice that I started maybe 6 years ago. So I have a compounding pharmacy called Revive, where we're attempting to bring cost-effective medications to the public and bring
direct to consumer? Is this
direct to
like
consumer
Austin,
accessibility. No, we're nationwide.
Wow.
We're bringing accessible prescription drug care to the masses is the goal of Revive. And I was out educating clinicians, and we work with telemedicine companies throughout the country, wellness clinics throughout the country. Our main focus is the gaps of what insurance doesn't cover. So peptides, preventative care, hormone replacement, hormone optimization, weight loss drugs, any lifestyle drug that is typically not covered by insurance, or any drug that insurance companies are price gouging people on, we will compound and mail to your doorstep for pennies on the dollar.
Wow.
And then Ways to Well is the company that put me on the map because of Rogan and Aaron Rodgers. We do a lot of treatments that aren't covered by insurance, so we can push the envelope. So we do stem cells, we do AI-guided magnetic electroresonance therapy for any brain traumas, anxiety, depression, all those things. But we also practice preventative care, hormone optimization, weight loss, truly trying to get proactive and predictive by bringing all these modalities that I've been talking about under one roof. So what tools are in our tool belt to drive health span and longevity? DEXA, VO2 max, neither of those are covered by insurance. Comprehensive blood work, that's usually not covered by insurance. Our consult with a clinician to deep dive into all of those different metrics. Like another example is our cancer screening at Ways to Well. It's expensive because we use a state-of-the-art lab that assesses for over 200 different types of cancer. In a primary care practice, they can only search for 5. So if they even do a cancer screening, they're only looking at 5 different types of cancer, and they can only catch it if it's stage 2 or later. With our technology, we can catch stage 0 on over 200 types of cancer.
Via like blood draw? Or
Via
what?
a blood draw.
Wow.
Yeah, and they look at you at the biological level and assess it at the lab, and then we can catch it at stage 0, which has a 99% success rate. And again, these aren't technologies that I own. These are just tools that we use because we're not in the confines and the constructs of the insurance model. So I can use, something gets approved, I can use it the next day. But the sad part is, how affordable is it for the average person? Most of what we do is. Some of it is, like Merck's expensive, the cancer screening's expensive, but DEXA, VO2 max, these are cheap, and you can go anywhere. Like, they're all over. You can find a DEXA scan place, and as long as you give me the data, it doesn't matter to me where you get it. As long as we have that data set, we can help you drive your health span. But DEXA, VO2 max, and blood work are the 3 biggest tools that I'm aware of diagnostically today that would allow us to have a real comprehensive assessment of you as an individual.
Yeah, VO2 max, that measures your cardiorespiratory fitness, which is intricately tied to health span, lifespan. I don't know if I've ever gotten mine tested. I think I might have at some point, but yeah, I'd be super. I've never gotten a DEXA scan either.
The DEXA is super cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool because as we age, it's how much lean muscle mass can we keep, right? That changes our metabolic needs. So, and this is what I'm talking about with the large language models in AI. If we get a DEXA and a VO2 max, and I know that Max is carrying around 10 extra pounds of body fat that you don't need, then we can have the AI draft you. You can literally ask Alan, hey, can you draft me a meal plan based off my DEXA? I need to lose 10 pounds of visceral fat in the next 8 weeks. It's going to calculate your lean muscle mass and your body fat composition and adjust protein and carbohydrates and sugars accordingly. And then you can plug in just verbally, hey, Mac, or hey, Alan, I don't eat XYZ. Okay, now give me some meals you'd recommend. And all that's built in. And this is AI. This is not anything that's crazy unique to WasteWell. This is the future of medicine. And this is what everyone's going to have in their pocket, whether through my company or somebody else's. This is just the direction this stuff is headed.
So exciting. Has there been any new data in the world of peptides? We've explored peptides a bit on the podcast, and I've experimented personally with some. Like I was taking for a while BPC 157, ipamorelin. I know that
what was your experience? Sorry, was it good or?
Yeah, I mean, I felt generally really good, but I was taking kind of like a cocktail because it was post a stem cell procedure that I had done. So there were a lot of things going on in my body at one time. In general, I mean, based on the research that I've read, specifically on BPC 157, I mean, it seems really cool. I mean, it's
amazing.
Promoting angiogenesis, sensitizing your cells to growth hormone, which is involved in repair and rejuvenation. But I know that human clinical data is lacking. A lot of the, there's a lot of hype around these compounds that exceeds, I think, in many ways the data, but nonetheless, a lot of people are using them and reporting really, positive things.
Yeah, I think we compound all of those peptides. It has become a challenge. So as far as innovation goes, it's kind of moved backwards over the last 12 months.
Really?
Because everyone's been knocked on their heels by decisions made in a vacuum by the FDA. So the FDA released a bulks list, what they're calling a bulks list, which is a dangerous to compound list. And they put peptides on that list, which is just insanity because these peptides, they're short chain amino acids. So when we talk about safety profile and efficacy and all that, it's one thing to make a claim, and I can understand saying, hey, we don't want you making claims because there is no double-blind placebo-controlled trial. There's a bunch of studies in mice and different things. Like I could send you, and I have them posted on the WasteWell website. I have probably half a dozen studies on BPC 157, thymosin beta, thymosin alpha. There's a lot of really compelling data in animals. Human double-blind placebo-controlled trials, there hasn't been a bunch, but it's also because it's hard to patent a short-chain amino acid. My buddy Ryan Humiston jokes, it's Flintstone vitamins for grown-ups. So if you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, I think it's $250 or $350 million to bring a drug to market now because of all the regulatory stuff you have to go through, you want something you can patent and monetize. That's really hard to do with these short chain amino acids. And that's the same struggle that they've seen with stem cells, right? It's like it doesn't have an FDA indication because how are you going to patent something that's readily available? And it's impossible to consistently replicate the exact same compound. Unlike a drug where you can get the exact dosage and the exact amount and the exact this, with peptides, you have to stay under a certain amount of proteins in the chain to fall into a peptide versus a biologic. And then once you move to a biologic, the FDA now puts you in a different class and you've got to be a biological facility.
Are biologics patentable?
There are patentable biologics, and that's where stem cells have lingered in this purgatory stage, unfortunately, because there's just not, like, Big Pharma is not going to go out and do it because they're making so much money off everything else. And in a way, stem cells undercut a lot of their market and solve a lot of the chronic disease problems that they're monetizing today. So it's almost like an obstruction. The biggest, dirtiest thing I've seen lately, since you and I testified in front of the Senate, is how wild the FDA's relationship is with these pharmaceutical companies. And if you look, the peptides get added to the bulks list by the FDA, a decision made in a vacuum. You look at, with AI, we talk about, there's an article, Google has no moat. And what it means is, like, if you can't build a moat around your large language model or artificial intelligence, then it's going to act on bad data. And that bad data is going to lead to bad choices. I would argue that's what's happening with the FDA. The FDA is corrupted and colluded by Big Pharma. Big Pharma has captured it. It has its ear. It's 50% of its funding and budget. And those folks are meeting with the FDA regularly. And they are putting tremendous pressure on the FDA to shut down peptides, any of this preventative stuff.
Wow.
It's this constant battle where they make a change and then they get sued and then they back. It happened 3 weeks ago. The GLP-1s were on a backlog list. The weight loss drugs were on a backlog list. The FDA requested for compounding pharmacies to make it. Compounding pharmacies around the nation are making these drugs to meet the needs of poverty-stricken and minority communities who can't afford these drugs because they're being used by every chick in Malibu that wants to lose 10 pounds, like candidly. And so now the diabetes people who need it can't get it. So the FDA says, please make these drugs, compounding pharmacies. We're in trouble. We can't get these drugs to the people that need them the most. You go out and you compound them. On a Monday, the FDA announces no longer on the bulks list. Eli Lilly says they have the problem solved, but they don't. They don't have it solved. There's still a back order nationwide. So a bunch of the compounding pharmacies sued the FDA on a Monday. By Friday, the FDA backpedaled. And the only thing I can think is they didn't want this to go to discovery and for all this documents to get released to the public about what their conversations were behind closed doors with Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. And now Novo Nordisk and Lilly have filed a new petition saying we want to reclassify these drugs and add them to the bulks list. We think they're dangerous. And they're the ones who lobbied prior to get the peptides added to the bulks list, BPC 157. But if you do a little more digging, multiple pharmaceutical companies are in the process of trying to patent these compounds and do exactly what we were talking about, monetize them and patent a delivery mechanism and say this is the only way to administer this drug because we tested it, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, and they can control the market. But the problem with that is it will not drive down the cost of that drug. It's going to drive it through the roof because of the PBMs and the insurance and the corporate capture. And so now a drug people were getting for years for pennies on the dollar will go to being $1,000 a month compound or something crazy. And so that's this merry-go-round that we're on in the system. And so there hasn't been a lot of innovation, I don't feel like, lately with peptides because everyone got knocked on their heels and they're scrambling to go what direction's up, what direction's down. And there's lawsuits flying around and the FDA is reassessing and reevaluating its opinions on all these things. And they actually are moving like 3 or 4 of the compounds off of the banned list back onto you can prescribe them. And so it's mayhem right now in the compounding space.
Wow. And you said 50% of the FDA's budget comes from the pharmaceutical industry?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's 47% of its funding. Kelly got in trouble with that. He tweeted 50% and the FDA said that's not true. And then they said it's actually 47%.
Wow. I think I saw that.
It's crazy. And then Callie's like, I'm sorry. I was off by 3%. My bad.
What a wild world we live in.
Yeah.
So what do you see as being a solution going forward? I mean, we are on the cusp, I think, of something's going to happen.
I think you and I are doing it.
As we record this.
We're all doing it.
Yeah.
The solution is
Trying.
we the people. We the people have to stand up to corporate capture. We have to push back on our 3-letter organizations. We have to question them because we're not going to blindly believe them anymore. With everything that's happened with the NIH and the CDC and the FDA over the last few years, I mean, you've got to be delusional to just blindly believe what they tell you. And I don't think the average American does anymore, which is a good thing because now if we question things, we can hopefully get answers. And through answers, we can come up with solutions. And we've diagnosed the disease state now. We've uncovered the root cause. Now the next step is what's the treatment? And I think the voters will decide what that treatment is in a few weeks. And I'm hopeful that, folks like Bobby Kennedy who are ringing the bell for years will be in a position to make change and to drive this change. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, regardless of what you think of him as a person and his purported solution, I think we do need somebody, an outsider, essentially, to come in and really shake things up. Because just to continue down the path of the status quo, things are just getting worse and worse and worse. And so I welcome a sea change in terms of the way things are done. I think putting an end to this corporate collusion, the corporate capture, I think is so important. I mean, it's only recently that I, by way of my conversations with you and Callie and Casey Has this really become? Have I really seen the urgency of this issue? You know, the fact that there's this revolving door, you know, that so many employees of the FDA, you know, 1 year will be working at one of these big pharmaceutical
I think it's 10
companies.
10 out of the last 12 heads have gone to work for pharmaceutical companies that they were regulating.
It's just insane. I mean, you know, that is not in the interest of the consumer.
It's insane. Well, you even see it with the opioid crisis. I can't remember. It's a blur because I did another podcast earlier. I don't know if we talked about this, but the head of the FDA that approved Purdue Pharma went to go work for Purdue Pharma.
Wow.
Literally 36 months later, took a huge salary. So the head of the FDA, who released OxyContin into the marketplace for Purdue Pharma and gave them the label of non-addictive, met with them in private at a hotel for 3 nights, helped them draft the verbiage, then went to go work for the company that poisoned and created addicts out of all these Americans.
It's so dirty.
And to this day, we're still experiencing. I think Jelly Roll said, like, when he testified in front of Congress, that every day the equivalent to a 747 jet worth of people die of opioids to this day.
Wow, it's horrible, so dirty. And you know, like, we've gotten criticism obviously for that panel. You know, the Atlantic called it a woo-woo caucus, and you know, a lot of people were up in arms on social media that, you know, the topic of the roundtable was nutrition, but there were no dietitians on the panel. But you know, and I try to steelman their arguments and see where they're coming from. But on the other hand, it's like, where are our experts? You know, it's like they're busy cashing checks apparently.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just like really frustrating. That's why I feel so strongly that, you know, having an outsider get in there, like a bull in a china shop, a blunt tool, would actually be a net positive. Mistakes might be made.
Even sitting at that panel with you guys, it was disheartening to see the articles the next day, because everyone behind closed doors genuinely cares.
Yeah.
All of the people on that panel want change and know we all have our own touch points and maybe our own slightly different variations and lenses on what's occurring. But we're pretty unanimous in that this is fucked up. And like, I think we all know it's very broken. And you can look at the chronic disease and the amount of chronic disease in this country and the numbers and the trends and the data, and it's hard to argue. It's really, and nothing you said or anybody said to me is controversial at all. Do we need a dietitian? I'm not opposed to a dietitian being on that committee, but you don't need a dietitian to know that this data is compelling and terrifying. And the Senate isn't a place, they're not clinical. So that level of data to those individuals maybe be counterintuitive. You know, there were times we went down rabbit holes that could be challenging for the senators to follow. Somebody has to talk to them in a layman term that they can understand with a lot of these data sets.
Yeah. But also, everybody that I'm familiar with on the panel has been hurt in some way by this. You know, I didn't even know about your brother, but your brother, Callie and Casey means mom. Right?
The girl next to me, I'm blanking out now on her name. She had cancer and she's 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
Like crazy.
And my mom, who was a product of that system, had dementia for 8 years. You know, by the end of her life was on 14 different pharmaceuticals. Yeah. You know, it's just crazy. And so, yeah, there was a ton of heart on that panel. And I think it was, such an incredible thing to be a part of. And
whether you loved it or hate the members of the panel, it created a movement.
Like,
it created a ripple. I really started believing in the butterfly effect after that, because look at what's happening and how much health is being discussed, even at the presidency level. Like, our future presidents are debating healthcare now.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is wild.
And that I saw an article that ranked healthcare the second biggest topic of this election.
Wow.
And it said that it's the biggest single talking point that resonates with women and mothers out of everything we're talking about.
It's amazing.
And when you think about it, I said this on Rogan too, we focus so much on war and the war machine and, oh my God, war. The fact of the matter is 1.3 million Americans have died in war since the start of this country, including civil wars. Since the start of this country, we've lost 1.3 million lives. I don't ever want to trivialize that. Those people sacrificed for this country. But every year we lose 1.9 million people needlessly to chronic disease. Every fucking year. Wow. And we're not talking about it until the last, 2 months?
Yeah.
As a nation, we've ignored it.
Damn. Well, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And mistakes will be made. Politicians don't have the best track record, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. But I'm optimistic. I mean, the fact that, the ball's rolling now, and we've got people at this, politicians at the scale now at which they're reaching audiences talking about this topic. I think it's I feel cautiously optimistic for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. I appreciate you having me on and letting us talk about this, and let's keep banging the drum, and hopefully we come to an answer that solves some of the problems.
Yeah. Yes, brother. Well, thanks for coming out. Where can people connect with you, support your work, reach out to you on social media? I've got one last question for you, but let the listeners know how to find you.
Yeah. Our Instagram is ways2well, WELL.com. Or that's our website. Our Instagram's the same thing, ways2well. And then, that's it.
Dope. What does living a genius life mean to you?
I think it means what we were talking about earlier. Taking the genius approach is to take sovereignty and accountability over yourself, because you're the only person that will. Nobody's going to care more about you than yourself. And living the genius life is educating yourself, gaining knowledge, gaining insight, and using that knowledge and insight to help you and your loved ones.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, brother. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.